Hello, everyone, and welcome to the MakerDAO Scientific Governance and Risk Meeting number 113, taking place on, what day is it? The 8th of October, 2020 at 1600 UTC. My name is Long for Wisdom. I'm the MakerDAO Governance Facilitator. I'm joined by a bunch of other Maker people, 31 and counting. And yeah, we've got I think we've got a fairly sparse agenda this week, but I think we've got some meaty updates from the various domains. So hopefully it'll all balance out. Some kind of quick preamble for those who haven't been here before. Feel free to interrupt and ask questions if you want to while someone else is presenting or talking. Someone will let you know if it becomes disruptive, but please, we'd love to hear from you. All right, I guess I'll briefly go over the agenda, such as it is. So we've got updates from the various domains. We're going to update on community development, on collateral onboarding and the collateral calls, on MIPs. We're going to go over the MIPs submissions for October. We're going to have the kind of regular state of the peg segment from Vishesh, and we're going to have some kind of spend some time kind of discussing stablecoins, the surplus buffer, and the current stability fees. All right, before I guess we dive in, I just wanted to give everyone a reminder. So it's the time of the year when daylight savings becomes a thing again. And so this meeting used to be set in the PST time zone. It's now set to UTC, which means it will jump by 1 hour for those in Pacific time, the Pacific time zone, I think, where it wouldn't have before. So just be aware that it's going to move by an hour when your daylight savings stuff happens. I'm going to do this agenda, do this reminder like every meeting for this month because I have no idea when all the people update. Cool. All right, let's start with the governance updates for this week then. I'll go through governance at a glance, then I've got a couple of other things to cover as well. So let's see. Yeah, we've had some kind of good active discussions this week. So Pre-MIP from the risk domain recently posted a post talking about the surplus buffer and the stablecoin issue I alluded to just earlier, which is kind of interesting and kind of explains some of the issues we're going to face with the stablecoin vaults and the surplus buffer. Let's see, we had a cool thread from Matt Rabinowitz calling community members to fill the role, or the kind of new role of Maker representative, which is a role that helps Maker interface with, or will help Maker interface with companies in the real world with the goal of onboarding real world assets. So it's pretty interesting in there, and we had more people than I expected, to be honest, volunteering for that role, which is great to see. So thanks to all who did volunteer. I believe there's going to be a signal request following up that shortly, if not already. Let's see, we also had Seth from SourceCred post the kind of final report from the trial for the trial of SourceCred. So we've actually already continued the trial, but this is kind of a summary of the first 3 months. And it seems that by objective and subjective metrics, it seems to have gone fairly well. At least it's been more positive than negative, which is good. I think matches kind of what my kind of anecdotal impressions were. So seeking consensus-wise, I don't think we've had any new signal requests this week, but we've got some that have kind of finished recently. Oh, so yeah, maybe that one by Matthew Rabinowitz you just mentioned in the chat. So yeah, we had should we take a more flexible and transparent approach to collateral onboarding? This was on chain this week and has passed, which is cool to see. So just kind of stay tuned for some kind of updates on that later in the meeting. The signal request to add to ETHB as a default collateral type also passed on chain, I believe. Yep. Though there's a note from, well, the smart contract team will give an update on that as to when it'll actually happen as well in the segment. So next week we have the rates v2 signal request moving on chain. And also worth mentioning is the signal request to increase the auction surplus buffer has ended without reaching consensus either way, to either increase or like increase it before or after we start doing flop auctions. Sorry, flap auctions. Flap auctions. The right auctions. Okay. So other governance things I just want to note. Kind of mentioned this last week, but I made some updates to the forum, just kind of changing categories around a little bit. We now have a collateral onboarding category, which will have everything to do with collateral onboarding in it. There's some other minor changes as well. If you have any feedback, let me know. But I was hoping it's a positive change. A couple of people have told me they liked it, so that's good. What's the other thing I was going to say? Oh yes, so I've also scheduled a new meeting, entirely optional, on Monday afternoons. I believe 1700 UTC, I think it was. I don't know, it's in this forum. So this will be a meeting, it's kind of going to be a loosely structured informal meeting to give members of MakerDAO a chance to kind of ask questions about governance. Like I will be there every week. There's not really any set agenda, it's just kind of show up and ask questions if there are things you don't understand or things you want to know or stuff you want more clarity on. It's going to just be like an open, kind of come if you have questions sort of deal. All right, I think that covers my governance updates. So should we move on to smart contracts? Chris, are you good?
Yeah.
Great, go ahead.
Yeah, so Charles will drop some links in the sidebar as I cover them. There's a big update this week. So hi everybody, I'm Chris Mooney with the Smart Contracts Domain team. So last week we did the weekly spell, which changed the base rates to 0. And we also increased the debt ceiling on PAX USD-A to I think 100 million. And we approved the new TUSD implementation, at which I think yesterday they made live. So now there's a new TUSD implementation that's live. The team also did collateral assessments for Wi-Fi, and then we also did balancer and GUSD. And then in the mandated actors sort of meeting, we all sort of discussed Lend and Aave and decided that we would table that for now, just until, because they're in the middle of a migration and we want to see sort of consumption of their new token. We actually want to see them like dog food their own token first. Like once they think their token's ready, then we should add the token. I don't know if there'll be any objections to that, but I think that's probably the safest course of action. So Brian and Lucas were working on some tooling for executive spells, and we did two kind of big things. We pushed our spells Kovan repository public. So this is all of the spells that we use to create executives for anything that we would deploy in Kovan. So that's out there. And then we also push the spells mainnet repository public. And so that's going to be all of the executive spells that I think that starts with the executive spell that deployed MCD. So so it's got a full sort of history of everything that we've done since the deployment of MCD in there. So that's going to be really useful if you're an integrator, or especially all the people that are working on technical MIPs. You can get an idea of what those, not just what the executive spells look like, but more importantly, the thing that's been private this entire time has been our sort of integration tests against those deployed executives. And so, if people see other things that they want to update, ways to make it safer, look at those integration tests, and that'd be great. We also posted a Liquidations 2.0 technical summary. And so please read through that. And then next week, we're planning on having a stakeholder discussion for Liquidations 2.0. So if you're expecting to use the new liquidation system, or you're using the old one and want to know stuff about transitioning, this is probably like one of the last opportunities that I think the community is really going to have to be able to add suggestions that might change the sort of code and design before we code freeze. So so please check that discussion out, and you know, I think it's next Wednesday, so show up to that and ask any questions you might have. We also posted the debt ceiling instant access module technical MIP. So review that if you get a chance, but that should hopefully, with a few parameters, set debt ceiling adjustments to automation so that we don't have to deal with like manual intervention all the time. Also, very exciting that we'll probably be having some flap auctions coming up. And so we did a little update to the Dockerized auction keeper so that anyone that really wanted to like spin up auctions, I think also if you look in the keeper channel, there's a video on how to use the auction keeper to do flap auctions. But the Dockerized auction keeper should be very turnkey. So you just read that section in the README, get it going, and it should spin up and without very much effort. So check that out if you get a chance. And then we also posted the MIP 25 for DSS Gov, which is going to be a replacement for DSS Chief and should have many more sort of features and that the community's asked for governance. So check that out. And again, that's also sort of in a stage where you could make suggestions and we'd probably be able to mutate code. So for the coming week, we're just planning on working on the collateral priority onboarding sheet. So I think I said that backwards, collateral onboarding priority sheet. So it's sort of a framework for how we're going to allow particular things to bubble up to the top. So the domain team will probably be going through and assigning sort of weights to stuff in that sheet. I'm sure someone will talk about that later. And we're planning on moving the join adapters that we have to a public, different sort of easy to use public repo to make sort of documentation for collateral onboarding teams easier. So that's coming up. We're going to work on collateral assessments for Uni, PaxG, Ren BTC, and TBTC. Those are kind of, you know, hopefully we'll get to all of those, but I don't know, they might happen over the course of many weeks. But and then I'll mention that FB is probably not going to go out this Friday because it was short notice for the smart contracts team. So we'll likely be working on adding FB as a collateral for not this executive, but the executive after that. So even though the poll said tomorrow, we need another week. And then the domain team's just planning on reviewing MIP 14, 17, 22, and 25 as well. So so that's it for the update for last week and what we're planning on doing. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask.
I'll just kind of make it clear that the ETHB thing is largely my fault for not communicating properly. So apologies, and I'll try and avoid that in the future.
Well, now we're on a more adaptable collateral onboarding. So
yeah, true.
Well, even so, we don't really want to be in a position where we're writing code and deploying contracts if there's still a possibility that may not pass.
Yep. Cool. All right. Any other smart? Actually, I had another question. So the liquidations 2.0 technical, stakeholders meeting. Will you be running a similar meeting for the DSSS Gov changes at some point?
Yes, I think that's probably a really good idea. So I didn't have it on my list, but I will schedule something.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks. Yep. Any other questions from anyone? All right, Nick, do you want to give us an Oracles update?
Yeah, sure. Should be pretty short and sweet this week. So we submitted Oracle assessments, I think previously for Wi-Fi, for PaxG, and then more recently for Balancer for the BAL token, and also submitted the MIP 12s on behalf of the other domain teams yesterday for Wi-Fi and Balancer. So that was mostly to secure, some collateral onboarding for the month. But now, since the the vote passed, right, to do a simplified collateral onboarding, we should be able to tackle at least a couple more for the month. With respect to kind of longer term projects, we have a kind of an internal oracle running for Uniswap to LP tokens. So that works. I wouldn't say it's quite production grade yet, and to feel comfortable putting something like that in production, I think it probably needs some more work and definitely some more set of eyes. So we'll try to run that by Hayden, and maybe some of the smart contract wizards that we know in the space. Yeah, Lev, I can totally share the source code for that pretty soon. I just want to finish writing up some tests to get the low hanging fruit, and then we'll just open source it so everyone can start pointing out what the hell is wrong with the thing. Yeah, so hopefully we can get Uniswap LP tokens in soon. I think that'll be a big deal, considering how much liquidity some of those have, like the ETH USDC, ETH DAI, right? ETH Wrap BTC. Those seem to be pretty popular pairs on Uniswap at the moment. And I guess we're also starting to look into on the balancer side, what we can do for a balancer oracle. It's a little bit different, mostly with the fact that so Uniswap has kind of a way of calculating normalized type of reserves. So normalized being if you construct like an atomic transaction, you can kind of move the ratios right of the two assets using a flash loan. And so with Uniswap, you can kind of just reconstruct a normalized ratio that's kind of immune to that ratio imbalance. But with Balancer, that seems to be a bit harder. So I'll be talking to Fernando a bit. What do you think's like the best solution for that particular case is going to be? Yeah, I think that's it for me from now.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nick. Any questions for oracles? Okay, moving on. So pretty much, do you want to do a risk update?
Yep. So we published Wi-Fi and Balancer collateral risk evaluations this week. Evaluations were made by our new members, Will and Monet Supply. And I think it's really cool to see more community participation inside risk at Maker. PEGG and GUSD also being finalized, will be released in the upcoming week. What we're also working on currently is ranking assets from the Greenlight poll, which is in line with the new flexible approach to collateral onboarding that just passed in a vote today, and I think you mentioned it already. So we're filling this newly established prioritization table. Should be publicly available soon, and hopefully this should we should soon have all the proposed assets ranked, which would give us a better idea of priority when we actually evaluate them for collateral onboarding. We also started preparing a new framework for calculating ongoing risk premiums and competitive rates. So this is in line with the post that Sam published, where the idea is to start using new rate setting approach, I think from the 19th of October. And the idea is that we would already have some kind of document prepared where we would suggest certain rates based on this analysis and would be applicable, and then would also finally be proposed by this so-called rates working group. And then finally, as you mentioned, Long, I posted this text in forums today suggesting to increase surplus buffer due to the fees on the debt from stablecoin collateral, where I think we can't really rely on full collection, and therefore it might be a bit inappropriate to start using that money for surplus auctions. I think we can have a debate about it a bit later, where I can outline some of my thoughts. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this week from our side.
Cool. Yeah, great. Thanks. Yeah, as Bruno said, we'll kind of do a kind of more deeper debate on that topic later, hopefully. But for now, I think we'll move on to Amy for our community development / support update. Amy?
Yeah, right. So I'll start with the community development side. So we have a really exciting collaboration that's going to happen soon with Claros, and it's going to be a co-fellowship for a collateral legal assessment framework. This is going to be an official announcement is coming soon. So you guys are getting the first little teaser. And then the second piece is the governance communications, as you guys seen, has been creating these snippets, which are shorter versions of the GNR summaries and the maker relays. So one thing is, if you guys have feedback, whether it's great, whether you don't use it at all, how it could be better, it doesn't matter. All of these are really useful for the team so that they can kind of improve governance communications in general. And then we had 6 meetups granted at Hoster in September. So we are continuously funding meetups and individuals who are interested in it all across the world. So please, if you have people who are interested, or maybe you want to host a meetup, you can reach out. And then I want to put into everyone's view our YouTube, just because we do have all the recordings of the collateral calls, GNR calls, these, and then even the real world asset working groups, the maker representatives, we try to get them up pretty quickly. And there are summaries, most of them have summaries attached to it as well. And the most recent, we also have community calls, which the most recent one has been how to participate in a surplus auction with Ed. You saw the badges live last week, so please redeem your badges on the forum. I know some people have been doing it, it's pretty awesome. We did fund another grantee, so that now we'll be announcing another grants soon. And then the bigger one is I just posted a new MIP for an operational support domain, and I actually have a presentation because can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
So I did just post one yesterday, I think on MIP 28. And by the way, these have QR codes for the forum post itself, so you can just do it. But I know it's pretty long, which is why I kind of wanted to give like an overview of what it is. It's going to be pretty intimidating when you see it, but really like the breakdown is you just have the main domain information in the first component. There's facilitator info in the next 3. There's no support facilitator and contributor list, although I will get to that in a second. And then these are the kind of last 2 components are pretty standard, so there's nothing crazy in it, but I am proposing myself as a facilitator, which I'll get into in a little bit as well. So I'm just going to cover like the first component around the main domain information and what the operational support domain is supposed to be. So it's mostly focused on development and management of distributed operations at MakerDAO. Like, what does that mean? If people have worked in operations, or if you know people in operations, it's actually a very, it's hard to pinpoint what exactly is, because it really depends from company to company, organization to organization. And this one, I'll get into the details a little bit as well, but mostly it's around the cross collaboration, as we're going to have more and more domain teams and individuals as well. And then making sure that the resources that MakerDAO has are allocated more efficiently across the teams. I just added a small bit around just philosophy. I think one of the main things is to keep the domain teams really independent and autonomous in terms of how they organize their own teams, and kind of more of the resourcing as well with once they are receiving the resources. So that's just something that to keep in mind of how I kind of see this domain moving forward. So the support domain has kind of three main functions. One, which is general operations. I'll get into that, what general operations is in a little bit. And then we have the cross-domain team coordination, as I mentioned, across different domains, across the different teams. As we grow more, it's just going to get a little bit more complicated. Right now, we have a good amount that is kind of more self-sufficient. And then we have grants management and distribution, which is a lot of what we've already been doing. It's just like formalized a little bit more into a role. So I've separated them into kind of short-term functions and long-term functions, just because we're in this kind of transitional state where the DAO is just kind of getting settled into like growth period soon. And so because of that, obviously we don't have a lot of domains. And so the short-term function of this operational support is actually just to bootstrap some of these initial ones. So it's mostly because we don't also want to like pop up too many domains very quickly. And so it's kind of alleviating that pressure. And a piece of that is actually around number 3, which is how we bridge and manage these resources from the foundation. So foundation is a good resource for how it's kind of a validated point of how we've been able to bootstrap the development. And now we're trying to decentralize a lot of these operations. And that's just, I know there's been kind of questions around like financials and things like that, but it's not so, going from foundation operations to decentralized DAO, MakerDAO is not too like so clear like one-to-one. And so just trying to facilitate that in also a secure way, because we do have shared managed resources currently. And so that's kind of where we're trying to iron out the details there. And so part 2 is really this idea of this minimal operational framework. So like how are resources distributed and what resources are distributed, and then the guidance documentations around them that will be coming soon. That's mostly what I've been working on. As I mentioned, it's not so straightforward. So we're trying to work out something that is really simple and easy for people to understand how in a transparent way. And then the last short-term function is really how we support. We're going to be a little bit more hands-on with the domain teams currently, just because we know that it is a weird transitioning moment, especially if there are teams coming from the foundation. So as we kind of grow, we're hoping to kind of make that a little bit more scalable. So that kind of leads into the long-term functions, which is that there will be kind of a way that we need to identify what kind of bottlenecks and opportunities there are for us to be more kind of effective in the coordination. Right now, we're just trying to get things done, but you're starting to see a piece of that when it comes to collateral onboarding, for example. We are doing this currently, and it's just more formalized, as I mentioned, these kind of smaller working groups and proto teams. I think it's really important that we incubate that early and catch and identify those, and then be able to nurture that so that they turn into more of a formalized team. And then, as I mentioned, the budget proposals and payments, that's kind of coming soon. So working with finance now to figure out what would be a good kind of proposal to, or like a MIP framework for that, as well as the onboarding. How should domain teams onboard? What do they need, etc. Eventually, this is a piece of the account permissions. So we are going to have shared MakerDAO resources, which currently will be owned by the DAI Foundation. And so trying to figure out what that process looks like. And then the last piece is, this is a sub-proposal that's attached to kind of the domain. So that was just all about what the domain itself is supposed to do. And I'm not going to go to details to like sell you my credentials. You can kind of do that in this separate QR code that will lead you to the sub-proposal. But essentially, this is a lot of the work we've already been doing. It's just formalizing it a little bit more. And for me personally, I'll just be working a lot more on this resourcing, the people side, how we kind of help individuals and keep this kind of a diverse background and recruit more people into working for domains, as well as the onboarding, as I said, how do domain teams, what's that experience look like? And then the grants and bounties that we're currently, so just creating incentives. So the collateral onboarding grants is one of them. And that's it. If you have any questions, I really do encourage you checking out the MIP itself, and then being writing, and you know, this is part of what we're supposed to do. So please take a look, ask any questions, etc. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Amy. Yeah, I would just say personally, like I've been working with Amy more since Rich obviously left. I've been like continually impressed with her. So yeah, so thank you for making my life easier, and I'm hoping this will pass, and it'll make everyone else's lives easier as well, as you have been so far. Does anyone have any questions now, or do we want to move on?
Oh, yeah, I'll throw one in real quick. I left over you. Hey, Amy, so I was looking at, I kind of caught your presentation in the middle. Sorry about that. I was a bit distracted. So if, would you say that you could recommend people that already work in HR, finance? So if you have friends or friends of friends that work in that department, is this something that you think someone can do as a side gig, or it needs to be focused like 100% in order to be effective?
So, I mean, as our process currently fits, right, anyone could propose themselves as a facilitator or a contributor. So we actually do have someone that will be helping on the cross domain collaboration side. I don't want to out people yet, because I think we haven't like had full conversations yet. But a lot of the resources, for example, we are getting support from people in the foundation. So the foundation does have a people team. And so we are kind of like welcoming contributors at that level. I think more thoughts that have people who have expertise in certain areas is always welcome, like especially legal or finance, things like that. So definitely feel free to introduce, and if they feel like they want to kind of also represent themselves, they can, as well as a support facilitator.
Got it. But zooming out into the future, 2 years from now, I guess you couldn't have an attorney that works for, I don't know, a large law firm and then also works for the foundation, right? That just wouldn't work.
Sorry, do you mean as in if they would be doing both, working in the foundation and in the domain team?
Yeah, I'm just thinking like to convince somebody to go from finance or HR to this field, right? They might not understand it. So to recruit someone that's already working for a large company and they're head of HR, you know, it might be difficult to get them to come to work for the DAO in the year 2023. I'm just thinking ahead, maybe too far ahead.
Yeah, no. I think if I'm hearing this correctly, and I think Kurt and Chris put in here, essentially like, are there kind of part-time options or ways for, like, what's the experience for someone who kind of can get from zero to into working the support domain? That's essentially like that onboarding experience that we want to clarify, because I think everyone has that question across the board, like, how do I work for the DAO? How much do I have to know, things like that. So that's something we're building. There is definitely part-time, but that's also part of why we have grants, right? So grants are a great way if you want to propose something. If someone is not necessarily wanting to work full for the DAO, but they want to contribute like a legal assessment framework, they always can. So we're kind of trying to create the structure for people to be more on the contributor level, where they can be sort of in an kind of loosely tied, not necessarily, it doesn't even have to be full-time work. And then the domain facilitators who are kind of more focused on that full-time side. So there is some kind of leveling there in terms of commitment. I think what's important is that governance just wants to know who exactly is working like full-time, or like where are these main resources going to.
Cool, thank you.
All right, any other questions? Cool. seems like no. Yeah, thanks again, Amy. That was an awesome presentation. All right. Juan, do you want to do a quick update on, I guess, collateral onboarding, collateral calls, etc.?
Yeah, sure. So the first one was already mentioned by Chris and by Primoz. We've been working a lot on the framework to be able to prioritize different collateral types and be able to be as transparent as possible with the larger community, and well, to have actually sort of scientific mechanism to be able to focus our energies. So ideally that will help all the domain teams coming together. So that's the first one. The second one, yesterday we had a very interesting call, and this is looping back to what you mentioned during the Governance at a Glance, the post by Matthew Rabinovitz. He actually did a very short presentation, and well, then he was able to answer a lot of the questions that every participant had. So it was very, very interesting. The video is already on YouTube, as Amy said. I think the link is somewhere there. And yeah, I think Gala is already working on the notes for that, but we should have like a summary to help with that topic. Again, if you want to join the real world assets working group, reach out to Step Ventures on Rocket Chat or in the forums. We're happy to move this forward. And the last topic, we had yesterday a very interesting call with Matt Longo from Keep Network and Fernando from Balancer Labs. It was super interesting. Again, the video's on YouTube if you guys want to check it out. And notes are coming soon as well. And next week, Wednesday 15th, I think, 14th. Yeah, 14th at 5 p.m. UTC. We're going to have Lung, the CTO from Ren BTC. I hope I'm not mispronouncing his name, and Hayden from Uniswap. So we'll be discussing these two interesting projects. So please join us. The agenda will be, well, it's already in the forums actually. So yeah, join us there. I think that the beauty of these calls is when people show up and have interesting questions. That's what makes them rich conversations. So yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Yeah, I would second one. I don't always get to these meetings, but I went to the last one with Matt from Keep and Fernando, and it was good. It's interesting. Kind of learn more about both the projects, and there were some good questions from various people. All right, Charles. Looks like we're on to MIPs. You set up.
Oh, I can't share my screen yet. Oh,
Yep, there you go. Oh, gotcha.
All right. Okay, so this week's MIPS update begins with, on Monday, we started the October's governance cycle. And the formal submission period was from Monday until Wednesday, end of day. And today, Law for Wisdom is going to perform the submission review to determine which of the formally submitted MIPs and sub-proposals will go up in inclusion polls next Monday. So we had a lot of MIPs and sub-proposals come in this month, which is really exciting. To start, we had MIP 14, which is the protocol DAI transfer, allowing the protocol to transfer DAI to specific addresses. MIP 20, oh, it's missing the bullet point, but it's the target price adjustment module that was extensively talked about over the past couple months, proposed by Lev. And then we had two real-world asset proposals get formally submitted for off-chain asset-backed lending and Centrifuge's direct liquidation module for the liquidation system of their specific type of real-world assets. And lastly, MIP 23, which is domain structures and roles. So a new structure on how to onboard domains and manage them, and looking at the roles of facilitator and contributors and how those are structured and communicate together. In terms of sub-proposals, we had two which are declarations of intent for real-world assets. So both of them pair with MIP 21 and MIP 22 for talking about the plan to onboard the 1, centrifuge-based collateral, and 2, for the asset-backed lending proposal to how the whole system will work if it's onboarded, and how those types of real-world assets will get onboarded in the future to generate DAI. And the last sub-proposal is a declaration of intent as well for strategic reserve fund. And if any one of the authors wants to speak after my segment, they can go ahead and just give an overview of what those proposals are, in case anyone on the call hasn't checked out these documents on GitHub or the forums. So next week, we have the inclusion polls for the approved formally submitted proposals that will go up on Monday and run until October 15th at noon EDT. And just as a reminder, I know I always give this reminder, but the inclusion polls have a specific criteria in order to pass, and that is the yes votes have to surpass the default inclusion threshold plus the no votes. So the default inclusion threshold is 3,000 MKR. So the yes votes have to be higher than that 3,000 plus the no votes in order to move forward to the monthly MIPS governance poll. Next Thursday, we'll have the typical review of the inclusion poll results to determine which proposals are eligible to move on to the governance poll the following Monday. Now, we've also seen a lot of new proposals come into the request for comments phase. It's been a busy couple of weeks for a lot of people working on Maker. And those MIPs are MIP 17, which is a rewrite of the original one, which was looking at debt ceiling adjustments as well as risk premium adjustments. However, this one is now proposed by Planet X, and it's for weekly actual debt ceiling adjustments only. I highly recommend to check that out to look at the logic and see if people agree on this is how we should go forward. MIP 24 is an emergency response system proposed by John Eichmann, and it was proposed a couple weeks ago, but it should be eligible for November. We have the Flash Mint module by Sam, and that was a follow-up to the declarations of intent for creating a Flash Mint module for Maker. So this is the technical implementation of that intent. Next, we have the MIP 26, which is the governance contract redesign, also called DSS Gov, which also includes a vote delegation aspect. Then there is the debt ceiling instant access module. So you can think of it as a automated version of MIP 17, although there are some differences. So if you are looking at MIP 27, definitely also look at MIP 17 to compare and see if the manual processes transfer over to the automatic ones. And then lastly, as Amy mentioned, there was MIP 28, which is the operational support domain definitions, ultimately defining the entire support domain, and if it were to be approved, what the actions the domain would take in helping facilitate and running the DAO. In terms of sub-proposals, we had a source cred funding proposal. I haven't looked at that one yet, so if anyone is on the call and wants to provide more information, please do. We had another sub-proposal as a follow-up to MIP 28 to onboard Amy as a support domain facilitator. And lastly, there is the sub-proposal for calendar exceptions. So it's an amendment to potentially not or skip, for lack of better terms, the December governance cycle. So definitely look at that if people are opposed to it. Alternatively, you could potentially do a shorter type of governance cycle or just go over the weekly cycle in the meantime, but it's definitely a topic that everyone should look at and consider. And I think Long, if you want to talk a bit more about that after my segment, please do. Lastly, in terms of collateral onboarding, we had the September's collateral onboarding community grant polls conclude on, well, this past Monday. To see the results of all the greenlit or deferred collateral types, please visit the collateral status index in the forums. And some exciting news. The governance pool to take a more flexible approach to collateral onboarding, aka use the weekly cycle going forward, passed unanimously with 44,309.45 MQR for yes votes and 0 no votes. So this means that the new weekly collateral onboarding process can now begin immediately, which is really cool. And just as a follow-up, 2 of the sub-proposals that were formally submitted to onboard Wi-Fi and Balancer using the monthly cycle should, I mean, at least by my suggestion, everyone else can decide, or at least Long can as well, should not go into the monthly governance cycle, because we have now deemed that we're going to use the weekly collateral onboarding process going forward. So the Wi-Fi and Balancer assessments are all in the forums, and people should go and review those. But I'm under the impression that it should not go into the governance cycle, because we can now use the weekly cycle. And lastly, the collateral prioritization framework will be made public either today or soon, TM. I guess someone else can provide an update on when it will be public, but this will be very good, as Juan mentioned, that it will provide transparency and a general idea of what risks and metrics are going into consideration when the domain teams are deciding which collateral types they want to prioritize for each cycle's onboarding. And in terms of pre-MIP discussions, or rather new proposal ideas for the future, there were 3 new ones that came in, and the first one is the flapper distributor. So it's a way to distribute system surplus while minimizing governance. A liquidations 2.0 update, a complete technical summary, which is fantastic. And lastly, a proposal idea to replace the mechanism to burn MQR with a treasury instead. So if you're interested in those, go and check them out under the proposal ideas section in the MIPS category on the forums. And I think that's it for me today. So if one of the authors wants to talk about any of the proposals now, I think you can go ahead.
This is Matt Rabinowitz. Yeah, I'll be covering, rather than taking up too much time of the community for this call, I've set up a call that it starts at the end of this call to do an extended Q&A. So I'm going to drop the link for the Zoom meeting for that forum post. And if you can join for that meeting, it'd be great. Answer any questions about it. Talks about being able to set up a secured lending structure to be able to loan capital to off-chain projects.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Charles and Matt. Anyone else want to briefly describe their MIP? I think we've heard about a lot of them a couple of times already, so maybe that's not super necessary. I guess I'll just kind of briefly talk about mine. So the proposal to skip the December monthly governance cycle is mainly due to the fact that by default it ends on, I believe, the 28th of December, which is not great for a number of reasons. Everyone's kind of going to be busy. So I think it's unlikely that it's actually going to come out with like particularly representative results, even if it does go forwards, which is kind of why I suggested that we kind of just skip it for December. We'll obviously still have the weekly cycles, though we might skip like the very last weekly cycle as well. Yeah, again, if you guys have feedback on that, feel free to drop it in the forum thread. Yeah, I think the other MIP that I proposed was MIP 23, which is the domain structure, the kind of domain structure MIP, which kind of just defines a template for domains to kind of define themselves using the MIPS process. Like Amy's operational MIP is an example of that template in use. And it seemed to go reasonably well. Amy was like, MIPs are a bit complicated for people generally. But I think I'm hoping that template is better than just trying to write the whole thing from scratch. All right, anyone else want to talk about the MIP quickly? Or should I move on to the submission review? Okay, So I think Charles covered most of this already, but there's 8 proposals. I think 5 MIPs and 3 sub-proposals. All of them seem to meet the requirements to go to be formally submitted. So those 8 will have inclusion polls on Monday. I kind of agree with what Charles was saying about the collateral onboarding sub-proposals. I think we're just going to not include those and as part of the monthly cycle, and instead just do them using the weekly cycle, which should mean that they happen sooner than they would otherwise. So I think that pretty much covers the requirements on me for that. So, so let's go 5 to the hour. So I think we'll have Vishesh doing Stir the Peg quickly, and then we'll kind of maybe spend a little bit of time discussing the surplus buffer and stablecoins fees and such with Primož and co. So Vishesh, are you good to go?
Yeah, I can do a quick one today.
Yep, that'd be good. Thanks.
All right. I mean, there's actually not much to say about this week. You know, if you look at the volume for DAI-ETH trading, that's been comparatively lower than, say, a couple of weeks ago. It's been sitting pretty much smack dab at $1.01, and same distribution of trades across the different exchanges. That really doesn't change much. The price graph looks very similar as to, say, 2 weeks ago, or you know, more or less for the last month, with mid to low volume, trading pretty much around $1.01, and minor fluctuations in both directions. I think the general sense is that with uncertainty in ETH price and with an absence of creation of a bunch of new farming opportunities in the last couple of weeks, things have been comparatively quiet. If we look at some of the collateral types, we saw sort of a smoothening of the liquidation ratio walls for ETH, with the exception of the lowest one, which has kind of persisted, still around $280. So the funny thing is that even with ETH price moving, that wall has sort of stayed. And so there's been some collateral management there, but we've seen kind of this sloping distribution now of collateralization ratios from most risky to least risky. So the interesting thing is that is overall an increase in the liquidation risk for ETH, at least. Overall, we're sitting at around 860 million DAI minted, about 340 million from ETH, about 360 million from USDCA, 75 from WBTC, 56 from TUSD, 300K from Mana, and 25 mil from PAX. So, and then smaller amounts from Link, LRC, Comp, ZRX, KNC, USDCB, and I already mentioned 3.5 mil from BAT. So again, same story as last week. Essentially, a decent chunk of the collateral portfolio is in stablecoins, and there haven't been significant movements in those minted amounts, nor have there been significant movements in price in the last week. So I would say all in all, pretty quiet. I'm happy to, if there's specific things people are curious about answering, I'm happy to answer those. But the general gist is there hasn't been much movement in the last week.
Are you seeing a slowdown in the number of vaults that are being created, or the amount of collateral per vault?
I mean, so if we look at collateral per vault, there are, you know, a fair amount of vaults that are smaller with with small amounts of both debt and collateral. And there are a fair number of vaults that have, say, a mid to large amount of collateral, but very little debt in them. So that's kind of this bucket. So there's about 17 million DAI from ETH at least, where you just have vaults with very little debt, but have some collateral sitting in there. So no, I mean, those still exist, but, and as far as creation, like maybe we can touch on next time sort of creation rates, but in terms of where the majority of the debt lives for each collateral type, I mean, again, that has not changed. Where you have, say, the top 5 or 6 vaults for ETH, it's even much more significant for WBTC and the stablecoins, where you have a few of the largest vaults accounting for a significant chunk of the debt there. I would say ETH is one of the more robust portfolios, where you have a lot more distribution of this debt, but even still, you know, by and large, when it comes to vault types, a few large users account for a decent chunk of your overall supply. Any other questions? All right, I'm going to pass it back then.
Yep, sounds good. Thank you, Vishesh. Okay, so we're kind of moving into the more general QA discussion section. So feel even more free to talk than you usually are. Yeah, so maybe Primož, do you want to kind of, I guess maybe try and kind of start a discussion around the surplus buffer and the stablecoin stuff?
Yeah.
Cool.
Sure. So I made this post today. I'm gonna drop the link here in the side chat. Yeah, I made this post today about potentially increasing the surplus buffer, and I think in about a day we're gonna be you know, filling the surplus buffer, the 2 million surplus buffer, and then from then on we're gonna have flap auctions. And the issue I'm having is that I think daily we are accruing about 50,000 DAI of fees from debt on stablecoin collateral. The issue I'm having is basically that we know that those fees won't necessarily be fully collected. We are aware of the issue we're having with low collateralization ratio, and you know what the outcome can really be via self-unwinding or liquidations, and there are some uncertainties, right? How effectively can we really collect those fees that the system accrued? And from my standpoint, at least from risk standpoint, it doesn't seem really reasonable to be spending the money, which we don't really know if we are going to be able to collect, to spend it on flap auctions. Because if we are to do so, what effectively we are doing is that once the money is spent on flap auctions, but then when we have this unwinding, and you know, we realize only, you know, just a proportion of the accrued fees, the surplus buffer can be drained, and it can be severely drained because 50,000 per day is 1.5 million per month, right? So if we just postpone this thing, and then we do unwinding at some future date, and potentially, you know, we unwind it with a lower collection of fees, we would be draining our surplus buffer, and this is something I want to avoid, because surplus buffer is meant to protect against unexpected losses, for instance, losses on each Bitcoin and other sorts of collateral, versus in this case, we already know that there might be some impairment needed, and that's why I was proposing to already increase the surplus buffer so we can avoid this situation. So this is more or less, you know, the proposal, and you know, the long story short is that the more flap auctions we're going to have, unless we don't increase it, potentially a higher probability of flop auctions than follows in the future, right? Because we would be just running the surplus, the 2 million surplus auction. And this is something, yeah, I basically want to avoid. And that's why I was proposing to increase the surplus buffer.
Right, so just take a little bit of slide chat. Yeah, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I mean, you know, the alternative here is that we change the stability fee for stablecoins down to 0. So that would be another way to do it. Keep the surplus buffer the same. There's one nice benefit to having the surplus buffer kicking off flap auctions, which is that you know, you could think of like MKR as the sort of buffer of you know, in case we end up under collateralized territory and we need to you know, mint a bunch of MKR in flop auctions to recollateralize our system, or to like take care of that bad debt. You know, there's which happened on, you know, right after Black Thursday. That ends up like sort of removing this kind of cushion in MKR, like the amount of buffer that we have, like, you know, of, I guess, value accrued there. So one of the nice things about flap auctions is that they sort of wind it back up again, so that we have like a cushion in case we need to mint MKR. And then sort of the other nice thing about flap auctions is that we're above peg, and flap auctions will release some of that debt onto the market. So yeah, I mean, I think that the flap auctions are important. So whatever needle we thread here, also what, you know, I totally agree that this is it's kind of a moderately urgent issue that we should figure out. But yeah, whatever, you know, however we want to thread this needle, it would be nice if we could keep the flap auctions in place so that, you know, they would have their, you know, even small impact on the peg, but also that they would sort of wind that capacity and that cushion back up in MKR.
Yeah, I basically agree on the, you know, on the positive effects of flap auctions in regards to shutting down, to disabling stability fees. Maybe a downside of that is that, you know, for all the new vaults that are being potentially established, you wouldn't be charging nothing. But, you know, the new vaults are actually the ones that where you can mostly collect some fees. So you wouldn't be really maximizing your return if you disable those fees prematurely. So I'm not sure if that's so wise. Otherwise, I totally agree. And there's another, you know, something that I forgot to mention. So the last time we increased surplus buffer to 2 million was, I think it was right after Black Thursday. And the DAI supply was around 100 million, I guess. I'm not really sure. But, you know, now the DAI supply is much bigger. We know that half of the supply is in stablecoins, but then the other half is still, you know, at least 4 times bigger. So, you know, just from risk standpoint, we should be having a larger surplus buffer, right? So ideally, you should always aim, you know, as a percentage of a DAI supply. And yeah, and just from the risk standpoint, I would propose to increase it anyway. But as I said, I mean, this thing has some trade-offs. It's up to community really, you know. From risk standpoint, I basically need to mention this.
That's also a great point. I mean, you know, you brought up a good point there that we can collect some fees on these vaults. We just have to cut them off at some point. Which actually kind of makes me wonder, and I'm just thought of this idea right now. So what if as we get closer, let's say within like 0.1% or right at the 1-to-1 sort of ratio, those vaults would be liquidated anyway. What if we had some executive that swept them into a new vault type and just sort of kept that vault type around for when we get offloaded, either through liquidations or something else. So we'd be able to collect the sort of fees on these things, and then right when they are all tapped out, we sweep them into some other vault.
I'm not sure if I'm following, if I'm honest.
I don't think that.
Yeah, so like imagine like a
materially
USDC.
different from zeroing out the debt ceiling on the existing collateral type and shutting off fees and starting, you know, a new one that
It's effectively the same
stuff
thing.
goes into. It's you know, what you're the latter thing is how you'd actually implement what you propose, because you'd never actually want to like loop over all open vaults in a collateral type or something in an executive, right?
Yeah, the only downside there is with what I'm suggesting, if you did end up sort of, you know, looping over whichever ones were bad, and you wouldn't do that on chain, but you know, if you could find them and then effectively like trigger some sort of manual sweep, you know, FA remains the collateral type that everyone uses, and we slide everything over into another vault type that has liquidations frozen temporarily. We get to collect the max fees on everything. Otherwise, we'd have to shut FA down and then, you know, move over to some other type, and there'd be some stuff in FA that we didn't collect maximum fees on. So
You mean USDCA, right?
Yep, that's what I meant.
Just double checking.
So I don't think I quite understand. What would be the point of pushing them over to this new ilk?
You get to collect the maximum amount of fees until they're at like a 1-to-1 ratio, and you know you can't like that. You know that you're going to accrue bad debt if you liquidate them. So you move them over to some other vault, then they just become basically maker reserves at that point until we're below peg, and then we unleash auctions on them and create some DAI demand that brings things back up.
So
And,
would the owners still be able to close them?
No, I think this would be, this would basically be like, okay, the vault itself is, it has gone out to liquidation. This would be like, you know, the equivalent of saying like, yeah, you've lost your collateral because it's under collateralized, and it would move over to this other vault type. So
I mean, you could potentially
I don't
transfer
know.
the owner as well, right? Like if you wanted
This might be too complicated. Like I said, I just thought
Yeah,
of it right now.
the result here is that the protocol ends up owning these stablecoins. So it's, I mean, I'm going to say it seems kind of similar to the PSM idea in that we end up holding these stablecoin bags.
It's pretty much, yeah.
I mean, so long as they never get to a point where it's profitable to repay them, the protocol is basically going to end up owning them one way or another. You know, I don't think it's really technically feasible to try to do mass seizures in execs or something. You know, you could set up like you could change the way liquidations happen for these vaults and then give some incentive for keepers to do it for you or something like that. But I'm not sure if it's worth the hassle of trying to like isolate out the ones that are underwater versus the ones that aren't. What I propose in the future is instead just like introduce new collaterals with like a fixed window for taking advantage of them, like a fixed time window, so that they're all basically on the same schedule. And then it's just like every 3 months or something, introduce a new USDC collateral and give people, you know, a week or 2 weeks to join it. And then they're all basically on the same fee collection schedule. And then you can shut them off as they, you know, get to that under collateralized point.
Because you're basically at that point just gating. Let's say you have a waterfall of USDC A, B, C, all the way to F, and you know, as A fills up, you just almost in effect shut off the debt ceiling, just drop it down to 0. So you're blocking like the entrance, if you will, and it's forcing it into bucket number B or letter B. No?
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, can I just chime in quickly?
Please do, Greg. Yeah.
Been thinking about this a lot for the last like month, and like I just want to clarify a couple points. Like there is nothing wrong with letting these vaults go under 100%. Like it doesn't harm the protocol unless we start burning MKR with that DAI. So I mean, I would just advocate that instead of spending our resources trying to fix something that's not really a problem, we just monitor the surplus buffer, like Pramosh originally said. And, you know, first of all, there's no urgency because this isn't even a problem until any vault in USDCA is under 100%, which isn't going to happen for at least like 45 to 50 days at this stability fee. And then even from there, you know, you just watch that debt, and on a weekly basis, if you need to up the surplus buffer to make sure that that debt doesn't burn MKR, that's all you have to do. Like I really don't think that this is a problem.
So pretty much made the point to me the other day that that's all well and good, but if there's some like bad debt thing that happens while that's the case, then it will be cancelled by the surplus buffer that doesn't really exist, and then DAI becomes not 100% backed. So that is also something to consider, I think.
Yeah, that's basically a bit of an edge case. I mean, maybe not an edge case, but yeah, basically, if you have a a loss event and surplus gets drained, yeah, you have a kind of an unbacked DAI situation. In terms of emergency shutdown, not really, but you have the situation.
Yeah, I mean, from a risk perspective, when a large, if you have a large number of under collateralized or underwater specifically vaults, that have actual bad debt, and that's in the surplus buffer, maybe you need like a little extra buffer on top of your surplus buffer, just for emergencies or something. But that's a risk discussion to decide what are the pros and cons and is it worth it.
Yeah, and like Kurt's saying, I think that's a risk discussion. And also keep in mind, let's say that the worst case scenario happened and there was unbacked DAI, the maker holders could manually trigger an auction and just re-raise the funds. It's no different. It's just a different sequence.
Yeah, that's true. We would then be forced to like liquidate them potentially when we're above peg, though.
No, we just do a flop auction.
No, but this is the point. Flop auctions wouldn't trigger because the protocol would think we had enough money, but we actually wouldn't because the USDC vaults would be underwater.
Yeah, but I'm saying you just do it manually.
Yeah, I guess you probably could do that. Yeah.
Like, and it's such an edge case that like if we're at that point, I'd rather be dealing with it manually anyway.
How do we envision increases to this? Like, would we do this sort of every week? We go up by a little bit, like by the amount of bad debt we believe we've accrued, just to keep the buffer sort of accounting for that?
I would do it monthly, but I'm lazy.
Well,
yeah, the only reason I say weekly.
There is sort of a practical limit as well. Like if we go below 100% collateralization, like that's starting to get into a bit more like territory where we're not going to be able to like gain anything on that. So there should be like sort of a practical lower limit, I think. Like we can't just run it forever.
Yeah, I suggest we go month by month, but we still do some kind of monitoring between the months, so we see how the peg behaves, the demand and supply, and then we have a better view through time. So yeah, I would do it like this.
I mean, I'll emphasize again, so long as you keep the collected fees in the surplus buffer, or you keep enough surplus buffer to cover those like unbacked fees, you never actually are in a situation where you're really losing money, because you can always, liquidate or otherwise sell the vaults in some way. And as long as you've got the collected fees there and you haven't actually spent them, you're fine. And, you can hold on to it with the hope that eventually, DAI goes below $1 and you can recover some portion of the value of those fees. And, emergency shutdown, isn't affected either. Again, so long as there's enough surplus buffer to cover the DAI, the unbacked DAI, then there will still be dollar parity in ES. So it does become a little bit of a thing to manage, though. So you have to watch it closely.
And with the liquidations, though, if we were to like turn those on, there are some inefficiencies that would lead to an overall loss that's greater than the fees collected so far. Like if the price stays where it is.
Yeah, but I would say there's no universe where we should turn on these liquidations unless DAI is below $1.
I agree.
Even if you do turn on liquidations and DAI is below, it depends on whether, are you going to use the current auction system, or do you want to wait for the new auction system, which is probably going to be more efficient? Like I think you'd get very close to the value of the collateral back if you did it carefully. Like you say, there is the possibility for some inefficiency there, and that's just another like how big do we estimate that inefficiency to be and factor that into the risk discussion.
So if you fast forward the video, let's say an entire calendar year to do just a gross exaggeration, if I understand it correctly, it's basically a declining return. We're capturing value today because of a risk premium that's associated to it. And over time, one entire calendar year, if we got into that scenario, we'd in effect be giving back those returns where we wouldn't earn anything from it. We would just have the stability, quote unquote, from it. So we'd basically DAI would be a proxy wrapper at that point for USDC would basically be the same thing as if we set the stability fee to 0% if we waited an entire calendar year. Is that fair?
Yeah, if we waited for one full calendar year, the leading vaults would be at 97% collateralization with USDC to DAI. And that would lead to overall losses, because I don't know, like we would have to have the price drop below $97 or 97 cents for those vaults to close themselves out. It would probably very likely go to liquidations at that point, in which case we're getting some loss due to auction efficiency. So this is why I would say there should be a lower bound of maybe $1 or something, 100%, where we should just turn off stability fees, because they're no longer giving us anything. And in fact, we may even take losses in the long run.
Wait, Sam, I don't understand that at all. So if they're at 97 cents, but that extra 3 cents is sitting in the surplus buffer, we just need to liquidate them at 97 cents. Why would we forego the fees on all of the over collateralized vaults just to prevent that from happening?
Sorry, when I said 97 cents, I meant 97% collateralization.
Yeah,
so if DAI returns to $1, they're still under collateralized by 3%.
Yeah, but we already collected that money. It's sitting in the surplus buffer. So we only need to get those vaults out of the system at their current collateralization ratio.
Yeah, it's the same.
Yeah, but if those go to auction though, there's going to be 3% in bad debt. That's going to have to be.
Well, I don't think we liquidate them that stupidly. You know, we set the bag to a lower value or use a different auction mechanism for them at that point. Right, that's something we have control over as the DAO.
The 3% difference between like the 100% collateralization ratio and the 97% ratio is like exists in the buffer is what kind of Greg is saying. Like that's not it's not lost. It's just in the buffer, and then like when the auction happens, it like then subtracts like that 3% from the buffer, which then goes back to like what it's supposed to be.
But like at best, that's sort of a neutral operation. So I just don't understand why we would run stability fees past, say, 100% collateralization or something.
Because it won't be, because the point is that if everybody were at 100%, then you're right. The point is that there will be a portfolio. There will be some that'll be at 100, and there'll be some that are at 102, as an example. And the ones that are at 102%, you should continue to charge a fee and either manually liquidate the ones that are at 100 or wait for them to be lower. It's when the blended number as a whole is lower than 100. But even then, the people who are above 100 are still generating value for the protocol.
Yeah, sure. That's a fair point.
Yeah. All right.
So basically, you can either come very close to breaking even, or if you get the situation where DAI actually goes below 100, then you can get positive income. So.
Yeah. Okay. We're kind of getting a little late, so we'll maybe wrap up here. I feel like we're kind of slowly converging on like. Well, I'm hoping that we're slowly converging on some sort of kind of shared understanding of how this works, because we've discussed it in the last couple of meetings. So I would encourage everyone to kind of join in on the forum threads and kind of try and figure out what the various options are, like what the benefits and downsides of each option are, right? And kind of once we have that, we can then move towards kind of figuring an option and getting some agreement on what we want to do. So yeah, thank you everyone for their points on that though. All right, I think we're 25 past. Are there any final reminders or anything people want to bring up before we close out the call?
Real world asset extended Q&A after this call.
Yep, that's a good one, thanks. All right, I think we'll wrap up there then. So yeah, thank you everyone for coming, and I will see you all next week. Thanks. Bye, guys.